this evening's video, we have a return of the true crime videos. Been a good amount of time since we last did one of these, and in this evening's video, we're going to be taking a look at some, essentially, some people that went missing and then often quite mysteriously reappeared, or they were found years and years later after the case went cold. So should hopefully be an interesting one. Someone's doing some brick work outside, which is really helpful. But as always, if there are any true crime cases in particular, or true crime themed videos that you'd like to see done, then be sure to leave your requests down below. But I don't think we need to waffle on anymore. Let's get into the video. We begin with a missing woman who appeared after 52 years. In 1965, Canadian man Marvin Johnson went to the police and said his wife Lucy was missing. "Alright," the police said, going through the usual drill. "When was the last time you saw her?" Johnson, probably looking very uncomfortable, revealed that he hadn't seen Lucy in 4 years. As for why he hadn't done anything about it, well, he didn't have an answer for that. The police had one likely answer: he'd killed her. That's an easy answer any time a wife goes missing, and it was especially likely now. They interviewed neighbours and learned that some years before, he'd done some sort of crazy digging in his yard. Johnson claimed he'd built a drain field for his septic tank, but just in case, the police went and dug up the field in search of wife bones. They found no bones, only the usual septic sludge. Johnson remarried. A half-century passed. Their kid Linda, who'd been 7 when Lucy vanished, finally thought, "Hey, how about I place an ad near Alaska, where everyone says Mom grew up?" This ad with Lucy's photo caught the attention of someone in the Yukon, who said, "Oh, that looks a lot like my mum." Yeah, after living in the same province as before for 15 years, Lucy had moved west and had a whole new family. She'd left Johnson, had been unable to take the kids, and just never checked in on them for 52 years. "I'm not missing, I'm here," said the now 77-year-old Lucy. She also said I was never hiding. Both daughters seemed totally happy with the revelations, and as for Johnson, he had no questions, as he'd been dead for 20 years. The next story is a missing World War II soldier turned up in Ukraine. When World War II ended, the Soviet Union held onto almost 1 million Japanese soldiers. These were either prisoners of war or internees, depending on how you define the terms, and the Soviets put them to work in labour camps. By the end of the 1940s, the USSR had released most of them back to Japan. Many others had died in the camps. Japan has noted the names of 46,000 of them, but the numbers got to be higher than that. If a soldier was in a Soviet labour camp and never came back, you'd probably be sure that they died there. Japan estimates that 400 unaccounted for veterans wound up living in the Soviet Union. By the time the 21st century rolled around, you could probably assume even these guys were dead. If not from forced labour, then just by the passage of time. As such, in 2000, the family of one soldier, Ishinosuke Uwano, finally had him declared dead legally. But he wasn't dead. He was living in Ukraine and had a new family. In 2005, he asked some friends if they could check in with the Japanese government and maybe arrange a trip over there for him. Japan sent a crew over to Kiev to interview him and found that, yep, it was Ishinosuke Uwano alright. They brought him back to Japan to reunite him with his 2 sisters for the first time since The next story is a guy discovered he'd been kidnapped 30 years earlier. Multiple people have discovered they were kidnapping victims, and we have a case of one such discovery leading to a second. Nistra Nance, late in life, asked her mother for a birth certificate, and her mother was suddenly very vague about how or when she'd been born. Nance's research took her to a database of kidnappees hosted by the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, and she discovered that she'd been born Carlina White and had been grabbed out of this hospital as a baby. You might have all kinds of emotional reactions to hearing that story. If you're Pennsylvania man Steve Carter, your reaction would be something to the tune of, "Hey, my parents found me in an orphanage. What if I too was actually kidnapped as a baby?" Which doesn't sound very likely, but Carter then combed through that same database Nance had, and he found a photo that looked a lot like himself. It wasn't an actual photo of a kid who'd been kidnapped from Hawaii 30 years earlier, but it was an aged-up photo, guessing what the kid would look like once he turned 28 years old. And so Carter got back in touch with his biological father and half-sister, who'd lost him decades earlier. As for his biological mother, her name was Charlotte Moriarty, and she'd left the father all those years before. The mother had taken Steve with her. She'd vanished one day with the kid, and shortly afterward, police picked up some unidentified woman with that unidentifiable baby, removing them from someone else's home. They sent the woman, who was most likely Charlotte, into psychiatric custody, and no records state what happened to her after she left that hospital. The kid, police put him in protective custody, then an orphanage, which was where Steve's adoptive parents found him. It's now been over a decade since Steve found out the truth, which means Charlotte Moriarty's now been missing for 40 years. As we've learned today, that in no way means she's dead, and she could well turn up any day. Next story is a runaway kid was charging people to watch her play games. If a kid runs away at 14, there's not a whole lot they can do to earn money. If they're gone for 10 years, there's no way their story ends well. And while the story of Xiao Yun, who went missing from Xizang in China, isn't exactly a happy one, it does end a lot happier than it could have. When Xiao turned up in 2015, now 24 years old, she revealed that she'd been living in internet cafes and bathhouses for the past decade. Xiao had made money by playing the Korean game Crossfire. Not by any kind of paid streaming deal, but by charging people in the cafe itself to watch her play. She was finally found, not because some fans of her saw her and made the connection. Instead, police finally caught her using a fake ID. She gave up her parents' names during the interview and the police phoned them. They'd loyally maintained the same phone number all this time, just in case their daughter ever decided to give them a call. Next up, 2 castaways landed on an island and found their missing uncle. Things went bad for 2 fishermen from Kiribati in 2011. Their navigation system broke down and they got lost. Instead of a quick trek back to shore after a night of fishing, Uwain Burinibui and Mai Tontake found themselves in the open ocean. They spent the next 33 days this way. They were able to fish for food, but we guess they weren't that good at fishing since they still had to go without food for days at a time. Water was a bigger issue. Sometimes it rained, but when it didn't they drank salt water, which is usually a quick-fire way to die. The US Coast Guard searched for them from the air for 3 days, then gave up They finally washed up on an island called Namdrik, part of the Marshall Islands. They'd originally sailed 30 miles from shore but had drifted 10 times that distance to this small island with a population of just 600 people. No one on Namdrik spoke Gilbertese, the language Ewan and Demai spoke. No one except one person who'd learned it from her grandfather. This grandfather had also washed up on Namdrik 60 years earlier. That earlier castaway, the fisherman learned after a very strange conversation, was Demai's uncle Byro. He'd gone missing in the 1950s, and everyone assumed he'd died. But he'd landed on this island, got married and started a family. He probably could have figured out some way of returning home eventually, but why bother? Some people dream of retiring on a tropical island. It seemed this island had the power to draw people to it. So why fight destiny? I love that one. The odds of that happening are just surely absolutely mental. Absolutely mental. Another case where a missing person was found alive is that of Denise Bolser. On January 17th, 1985, Denise Bolser vanished from her home in Raymond, New Hampshire. She shared the home with her estranged husband, and when he came home he found a note that read, "We've got your wife," along with some footprints in the snow, and Denise was of course nowhere to be found. Earlier in the day she had dropped him off in Manchester and driven back home in his truck, as hers was in the shop for repairs. Several days after Denise went missing, police found her husband's pickup truck abandoned at Logan Airport, with her social security card, birth certificate and credit cards laid out on the front seat. No evidence as to where Denise had went or what had happened to her was found. The note left at her home offered no additional clues. There was no ransom demand or any attempted contact by whoever had written it. Authorities pursued the theory that she may have been kidnapped and possibly murdered, but could find no real evidence aside from the anonymous note. They later came to believe that perhaps she had left on her own accord, but her family, with whom she was very close with, believed foul play was involved. Denise's husband filed for divorce after she disappeared, and was never pursued as a person of interest in her case. A couple of months after Denise disappeared, the courier service where she had worked as a bookkeeper accused her of embezzling between $12,000 to $100,000. In 1986 she was charged with the crimes in absentia, giving police a reason to believe she may have run off on her own accord. The embezzlement charges against Denise were later dropped, and over the years her family continued to hope that she would contact them. In 2002, a private investigator named Shirley Casey gave authorities a credible lead about a Denise who was living in Florida that shared the same date of birth as Denise Bolser. Authorities tracked down the lead and on May 13, 2002, discovered Denise Bolser living in Panama City, Florida, under the name Denise James. She had started a new family who were completely unaware of her past. When questioned, Denise admitted that she had decided to run when her ex-boss had threatened her life. She said during the 17 years she was missing, she had also lived in the Bahamas, California, South Carolina and Hawaii. It's alright for some, innit? Following her discovery, Denise had an emotional reunion with her family. Did she not think in 15 years? She didn't once think to reach out to them before that. Seems a little bit odd. And the final one is Michelle McMullen. So 27-year-old Michelle McMullen went missing on September 28, 2008. She disappeared after dropping off her 6-year-old son Jaden at a friend's house in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. After dropping her son off at her friend's house in Harrisburg, Michelle got back in her car to start the 17-hour drive back to Louisiana, where she was a student at Grambling State University. She called her friend at 9 p.m, told her son goodnight, and said that she would call again soon. She never called back, and hasn't been heard from since. Before she disappeared, she and her parents had agreed that they would take care of her son at their home in Harrisburg while she returned to Louisiana to finish her degree. On October 8th, 2008, Michelle's car was found on the side of the road off Morgan's Ave in Hagerstown, Maryland. Investigators found her cell phone, credit cards, money and purse inside the car. On October 9th, 2008, the Susquehanna Township Police announced McMullen was wanted on charges that she stole from the Progress Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. According to court documents, nearly $2,400 was discovered missing from the church after McMullen was fired for poor work performance in July. In December 2008, Harrisburg detectives received a tip that Michelle was working at a hotel in Martinsburg, West Virginia. She was spotted by a family friend and fled before detectives arrived. She'd been working at the hotel under the alias Monique Watson. In February 2010, the disappeared episode featuring Michelle McMullen's story aired. In January of 2011, a woman who had watched the disappeared episode called in to report that Michelle was working as a hairdresser in Oakland, California, under the alias Danielle Jones. Police responded, and after Michelle was positively identified, she was taken back to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Michelle McMullen was charged with fraud, theft and forgery. She stated that the $2,000 taken was a mistake and that it was used for schooling. A judge ordered her to pay $6,000 in restitution, and in July of 2011 she was sentenced to time served and probation. "I'm grateful that my parents never gave up on me," she wrote in a statement for police. "I was not encouraged to leave Pennsylvania. I was not kidnapped or forced to stay somewhere that I didn't want to be. The choices I made to leave were mine, and mine alone." And that is going to do it for this evening's true crime video. Honestly, there are so many cases of this kind of thing happening, and also it's not always like positive. Like in that last one, she had broken the law, so it's not always like a happy ending kind of, but I guess it's always technically happy for the families to get some kind of closure, even if the person is technically a criminal in the end. But yeah, that is going to do it for this video this evening. Like I mentioned, any requests for I'd like to do some like 1-hour true crime videos, but just reading off different stories as a list is kind of like not boring, but like it's not quite as engaging or rewarding in a way. I'd like to do one crazy true crime case like in real detail. So any suggestions for that would be greatly appreciated. But yeah, hopefully you did enjoy this video.